Falls City Council. I thought I had, excuse me. Thank you and welcome everybody to your City Council informational meeting. Today is the 8th of November, and I thank you all for being here, both on TV and here in the Carnegie Town Hall. We have a fairly short meeting today. Can I, Fiscal Committee, could I have a report?
You can. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Fiscal Committee focused on one of the things that came out of our budget conversations this fall, or this summer. We talked a lot about prairie view prevention service and the contract or lack thereof between the city and that particular provider of services. It's a great open conversation, and we look forward to moving forward in some sort of fashion. I can't even really tell you what it is because we're still in that sort of brainstorming stage. So looking for public input if folks are interested in that, but that committee then will move forward over the next couple of months, meeting in a work session type scenario so that we can be even less formal and have those conversations a little more openly. So look forward to that.
That's great. Any questions of Councilor Urbanbach? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much again. Our next area is open discussion. Any open discussion? Councilor Starr.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I handed out a copy of a flyer for the International Chef Cook-Off, and it is a fundraiser for the Multicultural Center. One of the participants, myself, is participating, and if you don't come and support me and vote for my food, there will be other volunteers that will be needed next year to help participate. So I seem to be taking one for the team as we're moving along here on in December. It's December 3rd at 5 o'clock. There are various chefs from around the community that will be cooking, more of an hors d'oeuvre type of thing. They asked me to provide 400 tastes. So I am doing a 5-cheese fondue fountain with various meats, vegetables, and fruits. That cheese is a wonderful product and goes on so many things. So I invite you to participate and come along and enjoy the event on the 3rd. I do have an email that for my close friends can get discounted tickets as well, and I'd be happy to email those to you as well. So bottom line, we get a chance to support the work of the Multicultural Center and the good works that they do in our community. So again, I'd appreciate your support, and I think it'll be a fun evening. There's a good group of people who will be providing food, so you definitely won't leave hungry even if it isn't sampled from my table. So
that's good. Thank you very much. Sounds good. Councilor Staley?
I wanted to talk a little bit about this little brochure that came out in our water bills, and I wanted to say thank you to Matt Tobias from Code Enforcement and Mark Cotter from Public Works for putting together this really informational and helpful piece of paper here. And I asked him if somebody would like to get more of them. He said he will have more at the Public Works office. And I also wanted to say in my own efforts to do beautification of the boulevards, I just planted 120 tulips out there today. So it's tulip time. It's daffodil time. Thanks.
Thank you. Seeing no other public input, let's move on to our regular agenda. Andy Berg with the EPA Community-Wide Assessment Grants. You're not Andy.
I'm not, but I'm going to kick it off for you this afternoon.
Got it, Josh.
Thanks for having me. Josh Peterson with City Engineering, and I am filling the role as project manager for this program, partly from my familiarity with working with other federal fund sources, so I'm kind of filling that oversight role for the project. But I did bring a number from our project team. I'll start off by introducing them. Some of you may know Andy Berg is our environmental stormwater manager, and Doug Johnson is an environmental analyst on his team. Those two are more the subject matter experts on this project, so if there's any questions that I can't answer, I'm going to turn it over to them. And then also for this project, we did hire a consultant to help us implement these grants, and I got a representative here today from them. Dave Constant, second row there, He is the team leader with Stantec Consulting, and they're working for us today. So just to kick things off, I'll give you a little bit of background on the project. Back in 2013, we first started looking at the various grants that EPA had available, and just considering whether those grants would be something that we could utilize in the city. So that's when we first started looking at it. We did see that the community-wide assessment grant program was something that we thought would work for us. I'm going to turn it over to Dave a little bit to go in more details, but I'll just give you a little bit of background here. In 2015, we were awarded 2 grants through the program, a $200,000 petroleum grant and also a $200,000 hazardous materials grant. Those combined together are part of our program and the funding for it. It took a little time to go through the various paperwork and things we had to do to start receiving that money. Once we did, we sent out for RFPs to hire a consultant to help us implement it, looking for that environmental expertise. And that's when we hired Stantec Consulting Services in February 2016. Since that time, we've been doing kind of the background legwork, setting the foundation for the program. We started by developing an initial list of sites that we would want to look for that potentially would be qualified. Developed a quality assurance project plan, which is it's the plan that EPA requires to make sure that we're following all the proper steps as we go forward into testing, make sure everything's done safely and effectively. And then we've been developing public outreach materials, one of which is the flyer we handed out along with the brochure we handed out with the presentation, and working on a website, things like that. So with that, I'm going to have Dave come up here, and he's going to go through a little bit more details of what the program is, what the opportunities are, and just fill in some of those gaps for you.
Thank you, Josh. Good afternoon. My name's Dave Constant with Stantec Consulting Services out of St. Paul. Stantec is a firm of 22,000 in North America, and specifically we have groups that work with the EPA on their EPA brownfield programs. So we have different regions, but
Could I ask you to move the
move
microphones up a little?
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Just a little bit of logistics here, as Josh mentioned. In 2015, the City of Sioux Falls was awarded a EPA brownfield community-wide assessment grant, and those grants have a 3-year performance period. So the end date on the performance period right now for this grant would be September 30th, 2018. So we still have 2 years, about 2 years left in the grant. Each grant, as Josh mentioned, is $200,000, and one grant is for the assessment of petroleum contaminated sites, and the other grant is for the assessment of hazardous substance materials sites. And I should note, in that hazardous substance materials grant, included is asbestos and lead-based paint. So a lot of buildings prior to renovation or demolition require a asbestos study or survey. So those, if the site is eligible, that would be an eligible service to be covered under the grant. These grants are 100% funded. There's no matching with participants, and they can be used by both public and private entities. So it can be a city-owned site or a private developer that would come forward and offer a site. So it's a pretty broad program. One of the early things before funds can be used, though, we have to prepare what they call a site eligibility determination. And what that is, it's about a 4-page background history on a potential property, looking at current owners, past owners, previous history. That's prepared for petroleum sites. That information is submitted to the state DENR for review and approval. For the hazardous substances site, it goes directly to Region 8 in Denver for review and approval. Basically, start with what is a brownfield, and I'll leave that up there with the EPA definition of a brownfield. And a takeaway from that is what I see is the presence or potential presence of contaminants. It could be contaminated or just a perception of contamination on a property. And EPA did that intentionally because the definition is very broad. And majority of industrial sites and commercial sites would be eligible to use these assessment funds. Here's just some of the reasons why brownfields are a problem. Obviously, a loss of tax base. If we can redevelop a property and get it back on the tax roll. Public health, threats to public health. Potential contamination to groundwater and surface water. And one reason the question comes up, why do we want to involve local stakeholders? And basically, EPA statistics indicate about 80% of these undeveloped or underutilized vacant properties will not be redeveloped without some type of assistance. And studies suggest between $8 and $17 of private investment can be leveraged for each dollar of public investment. So pretty good return on your investment from the public to private side. Just some more takeaways from SBA and HUD studies about job creation for redevelopment of these sites. The last bullet there is important. We find that about 30% of these sites, when we do investigate them and do take samples, the perception could be they're contaminated. Really, no one knows. About 30% of those sites, when we do the investigation, turn out to be clean sites. So there really is a perception, could be a perception of contamination on these sites. Types of activities funded. Initially, environmental due diligence, which we call a phase one, where up front, prior to acquisition of a property, most if not all lending institutions and even the SBA will require a phase one. That's basically due diligence, environmental due diligence. And what that is, it looks at the history of a property, interviews, historical records, and you develop a full in-depth history of that property. And by doing this, the potential buyer has liability protection under federal law. And like I said, that would be the phase one ESA, environmental site assessment, that those would be covered. If something is indicated at the phase one stage, the phase two is the actual assessment of properties and taking samples of soil, water, air, to evaluate those concentrations against set known standards from the DENR. And as I mentioned earlier, asbestos and lead-based paint would be covered under this grant. Redevelopment and market research planning can be another eligible service provided by this grant, as well as development of what the DENR calls a corrective action plan. If the investigation is performed, there's contamination, the next step would be development of what they call corrective action plan. How are you going to address that contamination? So that is an eligible expense under this grant. That was the first bullet there. Community outreach. EPA likes to see community outreach to the citizens various ways. We've developed some of the outreach materials, a brochure, some frequently asked questions. The city is going to have their own website that they'll be able to post different information about the program. Also on that website, we worked with the city in developing a site nomination form. That form will be on the website, so any citizen can access that website and nominate a site. With, if they think there's a site within the city, they can submit that nomination form. It's a 2-page form. It's basically a checkbox, yes or no, and basic history of the property. What's the benefits? Obviously, the goal is elimination of health and safety hazards, blighted areas, and job creation. I mean, one of the main keys in this program, EPA, they like to see job creation, redevelopment, new jobs coming in, and increase in the tax rolls for the city. Some of the key players in this program, besides the city and EPA, we mentioned the South Dakota DENR, there's the economic development, commercial lenders. A lot of sites in cities I've worked with where we've involved commercial lenders, and they're aware of the site and they know they're going to require that phase 1 before transaction of the property, can direct that developer to the city for that program. First assistant for fund. And some, I'm not going to read all these, but some of the city departments, other federal agencies, HUD, and just different state and local water commissions and things. But the goal here is there's a variety of other agencies that we work with in bringing this program forward. So one of the things what do we need? We're at Josh mentioned earlier, we're at the development of inventorying sites within the city. So if there are sites, the city's looking for potential eligible sites to work within the city. If you know of one, like I said, the site nomination form is on the city's, will be on the city's website, I think tomorrow maybe, we're up and running. Yeah. So that's one of the key goals, and maybe just direct them if someone comes forward, kind of push the information out within the community. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave?
So I'll just wrap it up before we open it up to questions. I guess the reason we're coming to you today is just to give you a little information on a program, let you know it's available. We're very much in the public outreach phase of this, where we want to get the word out to the city council, to various city groups, to the general public of, hey, this money's available, this program's available. If you have an interest for it, if you think you have a use for it, come to us, let us know. We'll help you step through the process, and maybe we can provide a service for you and help you understand what's happening with your property, and give you some more information to help you plan going forward. So right now, working with our webmasters, we're going to have a site up here by the end of the week, siouxfalls.org/brownfield, where the public can go to get a little more information on the program, find out what's available, and then, like Dave said, there'll be that nomination form there as well for if people have a site that they think they want us to work on, that they can submit that to us with some information, and then we can verify whether it's eligible for the program or not. As part of our public outreach, we're currently working to schedule meetings with various citizen and professional groups to once again get that word out to people. Some of those home builders association, developers associations, things like that, neighborhood groups maybe, those that can touch a lot of people. We want to just get the word out as wide as possible. We have the city teams identified some potential sites to get the ball rolling, and just for an initial list. We're reaching out to those property owners now to see if there's some interest there. And so as soon as we can get one or two of those properties and those property owners to sign up for the program, then we'll go ahead and start those assessments on those properties. But as we get the word out and people start submitting sites, then we're going to be looking at those to see if they're eligible for the program, and hopefully we can get as many on as possible. So with that, I will open it up to questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Josh. Councilor Kiley.
Thank you, Chair Rolfing. So since February up to present, you've developed, or you've been working on developing an initial list of potential sites for assessment. You're requesting us to identify any potential redevelopment projects, and you're also going to go out to the community groups. You'll be scheduling meetings with community groups to solicit potential sites for assessment. I guess my first question, and I'll have a follow-up, is can you, without naming sites or anything, can you give us an idea how many the city has identified up to this point, or have been identified by city or other?
Sure. I think I'm going to bring up Andy for this. Their office does track various sites, and he can answer that better than I can.
Andy Berg, Public Works. Our current list has about, as of today, about 27 different sites that we've identified. And like Josh said, the owners are not necessarily on board yet. This is us looking at a map, looking at prior history on the sites. Like they said, has the potential to have contamination. If we feel they did, we put them on a list, and now we're in the process of reaching out to those owners to say, here's a great program for you if you're interested in it. Let's get you a nomination form filled out, that type of thing. A couple sites we have gone through the process of submitting it to the DENR for that initial approval to make sure it's eligible under their rules. And then if the owner comes on board, then we can basically begin the phase one. So we have the 27 sites, and we are always adding to that as we're getting feedback. Like Josh said, home builders, developers, lending institutions, all these different folks. We're just asking them, when you hear of somebody doing something, if there's any potential for it, let's get them notified of the program. Doug, at least once a month, gets called with somebody, a consultant such as Dave, reaching out, doing a phase one for somebody looking to buy a property in town. And, unfortunately, it's too late at that point because they've already begun their process. But those are the people we want to catch beforehand and get them up to speed with this program. And basically, they can get that same work done for free through the grant program.
And then my follow-up question was then, it's a great program, and if we can get ahead of this, it's much better than trying to play catch-up. Any reason for concern on the part of the landowner to propose that they might have a brownfield or something that's going to be eligible because they're concerned now about EPA fines or something of that
Sure.
nature?
Yeah, there is that stigma with it because then it will be a known issue if there's contamination on their site. That's all part of why we have Stantec involved, because they've dealt with this program quite a bit. But in general, it's just educating them that it's a lot better to know what you have when you're trying to market your site. If there's an unknown and potential of a contamination, your value maybe is also unknown at that point, and buyers may be hesitant. Our selling point is that it's better to know, because in many cases they're going to have to do that phase one and phase two when they do decide to sell, and then if maybe 2 steps further down the process, and it could cause a problem in that land acquisition or redevelopment plan. So the idea being, if you're looking at selling or you have an unknown, that it's better to know it and present that to potential buyers so they know exactly what's there and they can have a solid plan moving forward. That is one of the most challenging things, though, with the education on this program, is that stigma of now everybody knows I have a problem on my site. So that's the biggest challenge for us.
Thank you.
Councilor Urbanbach.
Thank you, Andy. So This is only an assessment of the property. It is not remediation, correct?
Correct.
So then talk about what are some of those other hazardous materials that might be included. You talked about lead paint and asbestos. What about potential, I'm just going to say it, meth lab? I mean, what if, if there's a house that's been cooking meth, is that something that would, or is that just assumed? We just generally assess, yeah, they cooked meth there, assessment done.
I'm going to ask Dave to weigh in on that. I'm not sure how many different ones there are.
For the hazardous substances, for example, meth labs, yes, that would be a potential hazardous substance that would be covered. A dry cleaner would necessarily not be a petroleum site, but a hazardous substance site. An industrial property with machining and different solvents, TCE or those industrial solvents, those would be covered under the hazardous substance site.
Okay, great. Then if I could just one more. So $200,000 for each, so $400,000 total. The life of the grant is 3 years, and we already have 27 sites identified. How fast are we going through this money? Are we going to make it to 3 years?
Those sites were just preliminary identified,
Okay.
and all of those will not be addressed. I mean, they'll be prioritized as the city works through this with they're going to have an advisory committee and the EPA and us. We'll look. We want sites that have the high potential for redevelopment. So those sites are on the list, and they'll be prioritized as we work through this process.
Great, thank you.
Seeing no other questions, I have a couple. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand, Councilor
It
Stinner.
was up before. Okay, thank you.
I didn't
Thank
see
you.
it,
That's
sorry.
Thank you. Okay, I have 3 questions. The first one, out of the $400,000 grant, Stantec is you're taking your fee out of that, I assume?
Yes, our fee will be covered in the grant, along with any drillers, any laboratory testing, and all that would be covered in the
Do
grant.
you have an idea about what percentage of that you would be taking?
Between our services, laboratory services, drilling services, and contract services, 80% possibly.
Oh, okay, so that, all right. And then the second question is, are there some city properties that have already, Andy, maybe this is for you, Andy? City properties that have been identified as, would this be utilized by our,
We're looking at those as well. Our understanding, though, is that there are certain requirements that are how we acquire the properties, what evaluations were done. Basically, there's more red tape to get through in order to use it for public sites. It is eligible for them, but the sites we've identified on our list are private sites. If there are some that, if the city's looking at acquiring them, obviously we would hopefully include those as well. So, properties that we've already acquired, though, our understanding is it's a bit more challenging to use those or make those eligible.
like
But-
the railroad?
Correct.
You weren't
Yeah.
planning on using this for?
Yeah, no. I believe we looked at that, and Josh, is that right?
Yeah. We don't have any plans for the rail yard site at this time for this program. As we went through the environmental assessment process on the rail yard, we've already gone through and done a phase 1 and phase 2 assessment on that property. We've done the historical records, we've looked at the past uses, and we've also done soil borings on there. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30 soil borings we already performed there. So we already have a good idea what's on this site. So at this time, I don't think we need additional testing.
Okay, and my question number 3 then, let's go back to like a residence. Out of the 400,000 then, like that would still leave 400,000 to go towards divvy up among the people? I mean, this is what they're doing is all part of
Sure,
this.
maybe explain it. Since the program is to do records research and testing, there's no money that actually goes to the citizens on this program. What that
testing and records research is being done for, that's what Stantec is, we hired them to do that. That's why the majority of the grant money is going to them. Once a site's identified, if a homeowner thinks they have a problem, they would come to us, and then we would, assuming we could make that property eligible, we would do all the testing and give them a report at the end at no cost to them.
Oh, right, but then somehow you have to say, how much is that worth? Like, is it like $4,000 for a homeowner assessment versus $50,000 for a business? Is that?
We've got some information. It can be up, if they go through all the steps, the phase 1, the phase 2, and a cleanup, it could be up to about $30,000 worth of work on a single property. That can vary depending on, you know, the size of the site, things like that. A lot of the properties won't get to that level. We'll probably only need to do a phase 1, just the records research, and then a lot of times that'll show that there's no potential for contamination. That's a lot smaller. I think that's around $8,000 of value, give or take, for that phase 1.
Thank you.
Councilor Selbert?
Just curious, what steps would I need to take if I wanted to apply for one of these grants for my daughter's bedroom?
I don't think that's eligible.
Oh, I'm sorry.
On my own.
No, but kidding aside, if you do have a site that you feel you would like to nominate for participation, the website will have a nomination form on there. It's just a fairly simple 2-page form. A lot of it's checkmarked, but there's some write-in if you know information. You just complete as much as possible and then get that to us, and we will, and you know, we'll go through the steps if we need more information to contact you and try and get that information. If you don't want to go to the website, you can call the environmental division. You can call Public Works. You know, we'll help you out, step through that process as well.
Okay, thanks for the presentation.
I'm glad I'm not going back to his house tonight after that comment, but I do have a couple of questions unless any of the other counselors have something. Okay, as I heard, and I want to make sure I understand and the general public understands that what this program is, and it's basically picking out pieces of land that are either going to be redeveloped or somebody wants to know whether there's hazardous material there, or a building that may be sitting on a piece of land that they want to know. They may want to knock it down and either have to tow it away or haul it away or dump it back into the hole and then redevelop to identify whether there are hazardous materials on that property. Once that nomination comes in, then Dave's company will come in and do the phase 1 or phase 2, whatever it is, and that could entail drilling, looking at records, ownership, different things like that, what's been on the property to determine if there is hazardous material either on the top or below. And then at that point, there's no mitigation that happens. This grant does not take into consideration mitigation, in other words, removing that property. So if I had a house that had lead paint in it, whatever, and I wanted to knock it down and dump it into the basement, it would not pay for having that hauled away to the dump where it should be, where it's properly disposed of. It would only pay for the recognition that that lead paint is there and you can't just dump it into the ground and potentially hurt. And stop me whenever I'm wrong here. Is there any responsibility on the owner of the property's part once they have found out that there is a problem with we've got a brownfield here? What is the responsibility then of the owner of that property, either now or in the future?
I'll maybe let Dave come up in a little bit, but as I understand it, identifying that there's contamination in a site doesn't all of a sudden trigger an enforcement action from EPA that you have to clean the site up. It's just identifying that it's there. Now, that, if you're going to redevelop the site, typically you would have to get this information anyway. That's typically when a cleanup might need to be done, depending on what type of redevelopment is occurring. But
How deep in that?
yep, you know, if you've got an old warehouse and you're trying to turn it into apartments, you know, for residential is a much different standard than, you know, an industrial site.
Yeah.
So that's where the potential cleanup could happen. But that is something, like Andy was saying, you're going to have to go through the process anyway with the redevelopment. What we're doing is maybe helping you get ahead so you can do the planning side of things and providing it for free, to where you would have, if you didn't use our program, more than likely you'd be paying for it yourself.
Got it.
So, did I misstate anything?
Counselor Erickson?
Maybe you stated this and I missed it, but are the results going to be public for both private and public land? Or how does that work?
We were looking through whether, I think we're not going to share the information unless the property owner gives us permission to. We haven't looked through exactly whether this falls under the open records requirements, to whether it would be mandatory if somebody requested it. I guess at this point, our intention is this is all voluntary, both being in the program and also what information we'll share.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Somehow that didn't feel right.
Well, if I may follow up,
Yes.
my concern is you know, when you sell a house, if you have radon mitigation done and the levels came in super high and then the house sale falls through, I have to report that the next time somebody comes in. So I would be curious if it would need to be reported that if it's on your public or on your private property, but I'm coming in to buy it, you know that it's not good and that there's some issues with the land, but you don't report it to me. I mean, there would be some legal ramifications of it not being reported, maybe. I don't know if you're following me on that or not, but I just see it in my husband's job with, if something falls through, you got to report it, and same kind of gig with this, that if they find an issue with the land, you'd think that they need to report it upon the sale. I don't know how that works, but it sounds like you're researching it and trying to figure out the details of it.
And I believe, you know, real estate law is full disclosure. If you know there's a problem and you don't share it with your buyer, that there's, you know, there's some consequences there. I guess it's just that we're providing the information to the property owner. You know, if we're given approval to share it, we will. If we determine that state law says we need to share it, or that's what we decide is the best interest for the program, you know, we'll do that.
So it's not as if if I may follow up one more time, I'm sorry, it's not as if we will get a list saying, here's the 40 properties that we're looking at, and this is what we're getting for the $400,000 with that.
Our goal is to share as much as possible. I mean, it's one of the challenges with getting people to sign up. You know, we want that first site to be done and be a success and be able to share that with the public. The more we share, I think the more interest we're going to get in the program. So it's by no means something we want to keep secret. We want to be as transparent as we can.
No, and I appreciate that, but I also understand they have the right to privacy. If they don't want to share it, I don't know that they would have to, but thank you.
The problem I see with that consequence or that logic is that if they paid for it, then they can keep it private. When we're paying for it as taxpayers, that should become public knowledge to go along with that. At least that's just kind of my thinking and the logic that I have. If they want to go out and pay for it and keep it under their vest that, you know, I've got a small, you know, brownfield here, they're going to get caught. But if we've gone out and done the not mitigation, but done the testing at our, meaning the taxpayers' expenses, that should be public knowledge, in my opinion. Councilor.
I almost hate to say this out loud, but Councilor Rolfing, I agree with your logic on this. But it is because it's public funds that it's something that we really do have to be very careful about in terms of transparency. My other concern then would be, you know, what if we discover, again, using public funds, we discover something that's truly a public safety issue? You know, I'm sorry, your right to privacy went down the tubes when, you know, my kids are in danger or whatever it might be. And so therein lies the issue with getting people to buy into this program, is that you said it earlier, there's a stigma involved with this. And so, meanwhile, it's a great program, a great idea, and it's something that I know we need in Sioux Falls. Good luck.
People are going to roll the dice a little bit when they do this, I think.
Yeah.
But it's going to come out eventually. If they ever want to sell the land, it's going to have to be done. So better early and know what the problem is rather than later finding it out and have a sale drop through or something like that. So anyway. Yes, Councilor Starr.
Thank you. I think what's the most interesting part of this whole program is it is so positive that the one statistic that stood out to me was that approximately 30% of the sites that are evaluated are actually clean. So people who think they have a potential problem are able to redevelop their property probably quicker and are able to take a blighted piece of property and get it back on the market and redevelop. So I think there's a lot of really good potential in this program to identify whether there's a problem or not. But all of a sudden, you know, it's that I think there's something wrong versus I know there's something wrong or I know there isn't something wrong. So I think this is a very positive program for the citizens of Sioux Falls and a chance to really move some problem properties and get them back on the tax roll quickly.
Super. Thank you. Thank you very much, all of you, for a very enlightening presentation. And again, thank you, and we'll keep us informed of what's happening and how much of this is used and how you're promoting it.
All right. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Okay. I would entertain a motion to adjourn, or I can just adjourn it, I think. I think I'll do that. Adjourned.